It's my pleasure to introduce now this session. This session aims to offer a platform for the scholars who can share their views on topics that we normally talk at conferences, but we talk among ourselves, the publishers, the service providers. We talk about peer review models, publication models, incentives, and we rarely invite them to speak directly from their perspective. So this is what we aim now to have here, to hear what they think about what we are talking about and what we develop. So it's my pleasure to introduce here Eric Fried, who's going to be the moderator. I'm not the moderator of the session. I wanted them to talk among themselves. And this is also meant to be a very interactive session. So please do ask them questions. They do have some topics that they will talk about, but it's an opportunity for all of us to ask questions, direct questions, and to talk to them. So Dr. Eric Fried, Director of HIV Dynamics and Replication Program at NIH. It's my pleasure to welcome you in this panel as a moderator. James Fowler, Professor James Fowler, Program Director in the Communications and Information Foundations Cluster of the Division of the Computing, and it's a long introduction. But maybe later on you can also, when you introduce yourselves, you can detail more about your responsibilities. Sean Collins, he's a doctor, MD, and Professor of Radiation Oncology, MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. Claire Besson, Assistant Professor of Chemistry, George Washington University. Lisa Boxer, Stadtmann Investigator at the Laboratory of Genome Integrity, NIH. And Dr. Cheng Tao, Research Scientist, Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Celia, and thanks to all of you for allowing this ragtag group of outsiders to take up an hour of your time today. So what I think we'd really like to do, we don't have prepared slides. What we'd really like to do today is have a conversation amongst ourselves, but also with all of you in the audience about our view of publishing. And as Delia mentioned, I'm an HIV researcher at the NIH, but I also am editor-in-chief of Viruses, which is an MDPI journal. This is how Delia and I got to know each other many years ago. So I think what we should do is just go down the line and maybe say a few more words about ourselves, and then we have a long list of questions that we'd like to discuss amongst each others, some of which have already been touched on by other speakers today. But I think maybe most importantly, I would really like to get your input, your questions to us about how we view what you're doing in the publishing world. So I'll...
Hi, I'm Jim Fowler. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Mississippi State. I'm currently on leave at the U.S. National Science Foundation as a program director in the Directorate for Computer and Information Science Engineering. My publication expertise, if you will, is being a former editor-in-chief of IEEE Signal Processing Letters. I also currently serve as a moderator in the image and video area of Archive.
I'm Lisa Boxer. I'm a Stadtmann investigator in the Laboratory of Genome Integrity at the National Institutes of Health. And I'm a very new investigator, so I've only had a research lab for a little over a year. So I don't have much experience as an editor or anything yet. But I look forward to a long career, hopefully, of publishing, and I'm very invested in improving the process.
Hello, I'm Claire, so I'm a chemist, and not a biochemist, a very hardcore inorganic chemist. I've started publishing when I was an undergrad, around 2006. I've been a PI with my own group since 2015. I love the idea of open science publication. Every one paper that comes out of my lab goes straight into ChemArchive or something similar. But then at the same time, sometimes it's a little bit complicated when we're making a career out of it. So I look forward to chatting about all of those subjects.
My name is Cheng Yang from Oak Ridge National Lab. Before that, I was a faculty member at Virginia Tech. So my research is in condensed matter physics. So this, in past few years, focusing on the 2D materials, or now like some other word is quantum materials. So I come into this conference because well, in past many years, and just reviewing paper and writing paper, send it to journals and get rejected and get accept. so I just want to see like what's the other side and what kind of information I can provide.
My name is Sean Collins. I'm a radiation oncologist at Georgetown. And man, you guys think about this stuff deeply. I thought you guys were just hanging out, in your offices, drinking coffee. I have an MD PhD from Michigan, and I swear my PhD took 5 years. If you guys would have had this kind of publishing in 2001, I would have graduated in 4 years. So you would have saved me a year of my life. And I never even knew about pre-review into this, and I'm already excited to. I do online publishing all the time because I publish for patients. I want patients reading my data, but also doctors. But I love MedTwitter, and I think these kinds of pre-review papers would be great on MedTwitter because I've written a bunch of papers that were actually probably flawed. And I go to my online journals, I publish the paper, and then of course the first thing I do is I put it on MedTwitter so my friends can see it, and then they criticize the hell out of it and how wrong it is. So hopefully you guys can help me avoid that in the future.
So the first question that we kind of developed amongst ourselves, which may be less relevant to the younger people on the panel, is how has peer review changed during your particular academic career? So for me, I've been publishing for more years than I care to admit. Certainly the volume, and this is relevant both from the scientist's point of view, but also the reviewer's point of view, the volume has gone up, astronomically. So the requests that we get, and part of this is just moving up in the field, but the requests that we get to review papers is, in a sense, unsustainable. We couldn't possibly agree to review all the papers that we are asked to review. So then we have to pick and choose, well, this one looks interesting, I'm going to agree to review it. This one's, for science, I'll agree to review that. But many times, unfortunately, we have to say no. And that poses, I think, a problem for everybody in the room, which is what then happens to the pool of qualified reviewers when the volume is such that, I could literally spend, 7 days a week just reviewing papers easily, and I can't do that. So, there are much increased demands on our time as scientists to engage in peer review. The other thing that has changed a lot in my career is the emphasis on speed. And I think that's good. We all like to have our papers published quickly, but that also adds additional pressures on us as reviewers in that we get, harangued incessantly by journals, where's the review, where's the review? And I think there are shortcuts that get taken, and as editor-in-chief, sometimes I express my own displeasure with the editorial staff on that point, that things are pushed through too quickly. But I would be interested in other comments on the panel. And again, if anybody would like to add to these questions or add to the answers to these questions, just raise your hand and we'll try to send you a mic. I don't know how we're going to work the mics, but looks like a hand here, and I'll pass my mic to somebody else.
I can do the walking.
Thank you very much. I'd like to add, in your discussion of peer review, I assumed in the answers that you were addressing traditional peer review of papers, and have you come across the problem of peer reviewing data, code, reproducibility artifacts that are now becoming not mainstream, but they're becoming a part of that peer review funnel?
Yeah, I guess I can launch into that since I am more or less computer science. At IEEE, at least in the Signal Processing Society, we're not reviewing data or code. We're trying continuously to get those co-published with the paper, but the paper is the the archive of record, and only the paper currently. Whether that'll change in the future, I don't know, but we're not engaging in that at the moment. And I doubt, as Eric said, the reviewer burden is already extremely high, and I don't see how we could add on that to the reviewer pool.
Yeah, so kind of related to this one thing that's being imposed on us by, for example, the U.S. government, and I'd say imposed as if it's a bad thing, and it's not, is that a lot of the, if not all of the sort of metadata around our work needs to be made publicly available. So this adds an enormous amount of pressure on, so it's not, you don't just put a Western blot or a graph in your paper and call it a day. You have to have somewhere all of the data that went into making that graph and all the repeats and all the different versions of the experiments that went into making that graph available to the public. And this is good in terms of transparency, that people can actually go and see essentially the raw data. But it also means that, where are we going to store those data? Where are we going to put the data? How are we going to transfer access and so on? So this is a new wrinkle that has really come up, at least for us at the NIH, really within the last year or so. So this is, not publication per se, but linked to publication. If we're going to publish something, we have to have all these results out there for everybody to see.
And maybe a short one to add to what he was saying is, so as chemists, our data is maybe a little bit simpler. So we tend to put a lot of it in supplementary material. When we publish, we try to put the raw data there, or as much as something that would allow reproducibility and just anybody to look at the data before processing. The problem for us maybe is that this is worthless or less valuable if it's not machine searchable. So any system that would allow some kind of standardized form for supplementary material from the chemist's point of view would be great, because then it becomes machine searchable, artificial intelligence can have a heyday with it. And so that's something that would be useful for sure.
Why do you guys do research anymore? I mean, you guys have a hard job at Baseline. I mean, are you really have to do that now?
Yeah.
It's the fame and glory that drives us.
Yes.
Otherwise we don't get money.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean,
The data management part. When we write a grant, we have to write a data management section. That used to be limited to a page, now it's probably 5 to 10, and it explains every single format of every single file I'm going to produce. How I'm going to make sure it is conserved and available 10 years from now. Where is it going to go? How long is it until I can either publish it or put it somewhere else for people to see if that data is not published, for every single experiment we do.
Okay, in that vein and complementing it, I saw US biologists saying that when you document via data management plans, you are not documenting only for others, but for your future self. So is it worth writing 5 pages or whatever on a data management plan or learning to do peer review so that you can become a better self or find your data in the future?
I think it is. I think it's important to have a plan and to stick with it. It's just adds to the enormous amount of work. And some standardization that would help us put this data in places where we'll know they'll be there in 10 years down the road and they'll be accessible to everybody in a way that's easy. The data is too large to be individually searched. That would be helpful. For now, they just go sleep into servers effectively, which is less useful, but at least follows the law or the rules of the various funding agencies.
And I will add that I think the problem is even worse for computer code because you generally have tons of dependencies on libraries, and you have no guarantee that the code, even if it's completely correct, will run even 6 months from now. And so IEEE has partnered with a company called CodeOcean that basically spawns virtual machines that have all the libraries at the time that you put it onto their platform, and maintains those old libraries forever, so that the code will actually run in that environment. So you put all the data and the code and all the libraries and everything are intact. Try to maintain that perpetual access. And of course, you may not be able to run it anywhere else but in CodeOcean, but people can log on and run it right there in that platform.
It seems to me that a major challenge of peer review, which has changed in the course of my career, is the number of authors, and connected to that, the number of fields of expertise among those authors. It turns out that for many of these collaborative papers, most, if not all, of the individuals can't actually evaluate effectively the data in the paper that their collaborators are producing because of the nature of expertise. How is it possible for a peer reviewer to be able to effectively evaluate an entire paper when there are so many different areas that are incorporated? I'm specifically speaking about the biomedical field. Thank you.
I mean, to me, that seems like why you have multiple reviewers review a paper, and at least 3, I would say. Try to get 3 people from different areas that hopefully collectively can evaluate the whole paper, even if one individual can't evaluate the entire thing. I don't know if you have other idea.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
an excellent point. So when I'm asked to review a paper, I will often say, yes, I'll review the paper, but I would really highly recommend that a structural biologist or somebody with some other expertise also review the paper. In other words, I can handle the virology aspect, the biochemistry, whatever, but I really need somebody who's, let's say, an imaging expert to look at the paper. So, maybe 2 or 3 reviewers won't be enough in the future. Maybe we'll need 5 reviewers to adequately review a paper, and then we get back to this problem of finding good reviewers, which is really a major challenge for us and for you, I'm sure. Looks like a hand back there, or over here.
Oh, I was reading this morning on the plane a piece that was highlighted in Retraction Watch that said effectively that a peer review costs the academia $6 billion a year. And that is a lot of time that all of the academics are putting, myself included, are putting into the system. And now we're hearing, okay, we can't evaluate the entire papers anymore, so we'll need more peer reviewers. How in the heck is this going to be sustainable? Oh, it's not.
Limit the number of papers published by individual and per year. That's it.
Yeah, I think
I'm not kidding.
It's the greatest challenge that we face right now. The growth in the reviewer pool is not commensurate with the growth in the authorship pool. I mean, there's like an exponential difference, and it's just getting worse and worse, and it's just simply not sustainable as it is. And I mean, there's been a number of proposals, pay the reviewers. I don't know where you get the money for that, but the current model is just not feasible much longer.
So that's a perfect segue into a related question. Let me just pose the question, and then we'll come back, which is, how do we incentivize scientists, scholars to agree to peer review? We can pay them, or you can pay us. I say I'm both on the publishing side and the publisher side. We can have a pool of professional reviewers. These would be people who, for whatever reason, aren't doing research anymore, but are paid by journals to, or maybe by academic institutions or what have you, to just review papers. There is, I'm sure you're all familiar with Publons, which tracks reviewers' activities, and this is something that scientists, scholars can put on their CVs. I don't actually use it, so I don't know much about it. And then journals can provide credits to people who peer review for them, 20% off, your next publication kind of thing. Maybe 40% off if you're an editorial board member and so on, which provides a financial incentive, not directly, in pocket to the reviewer, but an incentive for that individual to participate in the process. I'm at the NIH. I'm not allowed to take any kind of payment for anything, so the paying the reviewers doesn't work for me, but a credit for an article processing fee would be a reasonable incentive. And there is a question that may or may not be related to this.
It's totally related, so this is a good segue to my comment. Melissa Patterson, AIP Publishing, recovering chemist. My comment was about incentive structures, and of course, a lot of the publishing houses are grappling, as well as all of you, with the real problem of reviewer fatigue. And I'm wondering if, okay, there's the incentive structures amongst the publishers that can be provided to reviewers, but what kinds of conversations are you having at the institutional level where, you know, you use this, all the work that you're doing to review becomes part of like the corpus of work that you're doing into the community, and then you have sort of acknowledgement in your tenure packages or in your promotion packages. Right now, as it stands, how much money you're bringing into the institution via grants is something that they're looking at. Your publication output is another form of scientific currency. And so is there a desire on your part to have reviewing as part of that as well?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because to a certain extent, it's a bit of a thankless job. So, you know, when we come up for tenure and promotion and so on, we are expected to demonstrate that we are engaged in some service to the community. And part of that is being on editorial boards, reviewing papers. But I don't think it's commensurate with the amount of time it takes us. So it's also, somebody can spend 10% of their time reviewing papers. They can check that box. Next guy maybe spends 50% of his or her time, doesn't check the box any more than the 10% person. So I think this is why, one of the reasons, it's kind of like teaching. You know, it's something you got to do if you're at an academic institution, but everybody tries, not everybody, but many people try to do as little of it as possible. You know, they want to check the box so that they can move forward, but they can't spend 80% of their time teaching, because then they're not productive. So this is a real, you know, there should be a way to, you know, reward us scientists, scholars, to a greater extent for the amount of time spent doing this. And I think part of it is service. We all recognize that we like to get fair and qualified peer review for our papers, so we then turn around and agree to provide that to our colleagues. I think that's really the system that has allowed this to sustain itself, or the basis for the sustainability of the system for so many years. But I think it begins to break down when the workload becomes so high.
As a former chair of our department's promotion and tenure committee, I can speak, you know, how this works in real life. So you have to have an excellent rating in teaching or research or service, and it can be any of the three as long as it's research. And along those lines, you can have research productivity in many metrics, journal publication being one, review workload being another, et cetera. The only one that counts is your journal output. That's it. Nothing else in your promotion and tenure package is worth anything. So there's no way that the institutions are going to incentivize, you know, you reviewed 10 papers, but this other person did 20, so we're going to get them tenure and you not. No, that's just not going to work. It's all on the journal output. That's the sad fact of the matter.
Confirm.
So my question for the panel members is, how many dollars an hour would I have to pay you to review a manuscript?
You don't have that much money.
I've been told that I'm worth $400 an hour, and it takes me generally, I don't know, my articles that I review are pretty simple. They're medical. 3 hours. So you're going to pay me $1,200 to review it? And I'm only one of usually 2 reviewers.
As I say at the NIH, I can't accept a penny for anything. So, okay, we got a couple questions. Yeah.
Some of you are representing funding agencies, and I wanted to know what is your perspective on the Nelson memo, and how regarding the infrastructure that's necessary, you alluded to the infrastructure that would be necessary in order for all this data to be stored and be useful in a way. I know that the contest is in the peer review, but the purpose of the peer review is to validate the research results and also to make sure that the research is repeatable, because science is about repeatability, right? So that was one question. Second question is regarding the recent advances in natural processing and natural language processing tasks, the large language models, etc. Do you see that as being able to help with the growth in publications that you have mentioned earlier? And lastly, what's your view on nano-publications within the same context in terms of accelerating the peer review process? Thank you.
I'll hop in and answer your second one. ChatGPT is going to make everything worse, okay? We're going to start seeing, completely generated papers. It may not be like they're completely unmoderated, but it's going to allow a number of authors who would be rather slow in writing to become very fast. And that's going to make things a lot worse. Okay, in terms of availability of data and everything from the perspective, at least from National Science Foundation, I'm afraid it's kind of not our problem. For me at Mississippi State, it's not a problem for me to put data and stuff out on my own web page. And I think most academics also have pretty good institutional support, as long as you're not trying to make databases that are like 10 terabytes available. If they're more modest size, it's just not really a problem. So people that do have larger data sets, they're probably going to have to write that into their grants for computer support for that. And we at National Science Foundation would fund that kind of activity.
Okay, so speaking not as a company, but as a scientist, a suggestion. Personally, I only review those papers, agree to review, which are close and dear to my heart. Not in the sense that they are correct, but in the sense that they are about my research. I want to keep my little field in which I work in order, and there I would do this because for me it's part of my, if you wish, publication and scientific career. So the only way to break the vicious circle, other than tell to the funding agencies, to institutions, to acknowledge this in some way, is to be very targeted when you select reviewers for your articles. I think it's one of the ways out, at least to an extent to which I see it now.
I totally agree with that, and I think very often the journals that are really emphasizing speed don't take the time to find appropriate reviewers. So they ask 20 people, review this paper, they get a couple who agree, who are often very junior, not qualified, not knowledgeable, and then they come back with reviews that are essentially worthless. Yeah, it's a nice paper, but they missed an "and" on page 4, and that's the review. And so the paper gets published, and yeah, technically it was peer reviewed, but not really. So I agree that all of us who are involved in the publishing end of the chain need to put forward the extra time to really find reviewers who are knowledgeable and expert and suitable. And those individuals are also most willing to accept because it's something that's of interest to them. I think there's no argument with that.
Yeah, Marcel Laflamme, I'm at PLOS. I'll just ask kind of a big, naive question in a way, which is this. So how do you decide as a researcher which journal you'd like to publish your research in? And how has the answer to that changed, if it has, across your career cycle?
I think we all try to send our papers to as high a journal as we think we can get. And some researchers will send everything to Science, and it'll always get rejected, and then they go down, and that kind of wastes everybody's time. I think most of us who have been in this business for a while have a pretty good innate sense of, yeah, this feels like an impact 15 paper, or maybe a 10, or maybe it's more of a specialized paper. But what has changed, going back to the very first question, certainly during the course of my career, is the number of options that we have. It used to be there were really a handful of journals we would consider. Now there are literally dozens that we could send papers to. And so we have to sometimes agonize over, which of all those, what are the relative merits of all of those. And I think part of the thing that drives the speed is some authors want, we'll go to those journals that, provide the fastest service. And then I think we get all these shortcuts that are taken and the system breaks down. So, I think, I don't know. To be provocative, maybe there are too many journals out there. Sorry. Keep your Rotten Tomatoes.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
So I'm a practicing radiation oncologist. So I work 5 days a week full time. So this is like I do research on the side, and I publish in online journals that I know that I'll get a pretty quick review. It'll be reasonable. I'm not willing to do. I don't have the energy or the bandwidth to send it to another journal. So I send it to a journal that I know it'll eventually get accepted as long as I respond to the reviewers. That's online, so both academics and patients can read it, because it's really important to me that my patients can read our outcomes. Most of our outcomes are clinical outcomes, and they're not that sophisticated. So, if you're a guy who has prostate cancer, you want to know what's the chance of you urinating on yourself, 5 years after treatment. I mean, that's pretty simple. Patients can read it, academics can read it. But I love Frontiers in Radiation Oncology. It's my journal, and it gets accepted. When I go to higher level journals that are not open access, then people keep on sending me emails saying, "Can you send me a copy of it because I don't want to pay the $50."
So my field is in condensed matter physics. It's pretty much like us. We try to send our papers to higher impact journals. And of course, if the results we know it's not at the science and nature level, and then we will go to level. So that's the impact factor is the first thing we look at. And another thing is the journals in physics, for example, physics review letters. So that's so as a physicist, besides Nature Science or Nature journals, and that's our first choice. So that's one is field, the other is impact factor. That's how we choose the journals.
So I think I have the same incentives as everybody else to publish in high impact, because I want tenure someday. I try very hard. I have to say, I believe in the open access, so whenever I have the money to do it, I will try to do it. Problem is, the money that I could do to pay for an open access journal, usually it's either that or I pay for some chemicals, and my library is not going to help, so it has to come from my own money. And even if I budget it on grants, at this time I have that money and I have to decide whether I send a student to a conference or I pay for an open access. Sometimes there's a little bit of this and that. Beyond the open access, I will be totally frank with you, there are some publishing companies I won't publish with. I like society journals because I believe in a little bit of an ethos of not completely gouging the libraries, and so I will avoid certain publications because they give me the hives. I won't name names because I want to come out of this room alive, but it is part of my reasoning if something somewhat down the list.
Yeah, not much to add. I agree, though. I'm on the tenure track, and so impact is pretty much the biggest incentive. And in terms of knowing where to go, I think we get a lot of feedback from our peers, from presenting our work, from sending them our manuscripts beforehand, and that's usually the best way to gauge how high impact we can go. But I'm not opposed to any journals yet, but maybe that's, maybe it's because I haven't been around long enough.
Give it time, Lisa.
Okay, so I'm a little different. I'm a tenured full professor and have been for quite some time. Back when I was going through promotion and tenure, I don't even think impact factor existed. So it's something, I don't pay attention to impact factor at all as to where I publish. It doesn't matter to me. So it's a luxurious life, I guess. So there's probably 5 journals in which would be a potential for any given paper, and I know the journals very well. I usually know the editor-in-chief personally, and I know where it should go, and that's what I do. I send it to the right place for it.
Any other discussion around that question from the audience? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm here with several hats, but among them, I am a university professor in computer science in Brazil. And myself and two other colleagues were holding a webinar to 300 postdocs on how they should publish, what to publish, whatever. And we told them, look for quality, not for quantity. Do not look so much for the impact factor, but the quality of the audience you want to reach. And one said, it's very easy for you old fogies to say that, but I need tenure. I need to find a job. So what is, and universities, as you said, have a big responsibility on that because they go for numbers and not so much for quality lots of times. So what kind of advice would you give to young researchers who want to be hired and do not want to produce garbage in, garbage out?
Right. So I've done author training for the IEEE at a number of our conferences, and it's very similar to that, where we're talking to the junior authors and would-be authors and giving them the advice. And we're giving them that same sort of advice that you want to do the right thing. My advice to them in general, and this is often along the lines of plagiarism, because plagiarism is a shortcut that you can take very easily, but you only have one academic reputation. And once you destroy that, you never get it back. And so every single thing that you do publicly goes towards that academic reputation. Every choice that you make as to where you publish, and everything that you do while you're publishing, plagiarism, that kind of stuff, all of that feeds into that. And you have to curate your academic life very, very carefully. And it doesn't matter tenure or whatever if you destroy your academic reputation before you even get there. So that's the advice.
Yeah, and I would also add that tenure review panels, I sit on the NCI tenure review panel, everywhere government academia need to be encouraged very strongly to evaluate the quality of the candidate's work, not where they're publishing. So I think if you do sort of a slap-dab assessment of a tenure candidate, you say, well, he's got or she's got 3 science papers, good to go. That's not doing the job properly. It may be their, publications in more specialized journals, but they're exceedingly high quality, and that person deserves tenure, perhaps more so than the individual with the higher impact paper. So I think that's sort of on us, I think, as scientists to make sure that to the extent that we're involved in making tenure decisions, we look not just at where people publish, or how much they publish, but what people publish. Is it high quality? Is it transformative? Is it moving the field forward? Rather than just a flash in the pan, high profile paper.
You've got a captive audience here of publishers, so I'd be interested in each of the panel's view on what one thing would you like publishers to change?
Accept every paper that I submit.
I really don't know. I'm at a loss for words. That's tough because I think a lot of our problems in academia is of our own making, and we're lying in the bed that we made. And you can maybe adjust the sheets for us a little bit, but I don't know that you're going to solve our problems.
I really do like the idea of getting credit for reviews in terms of, like right now, when I publish in the online journal that I like, I think it's in euros, it's not in dollars. I think it's 2,000 euros. So, but I'd be willing to review to cut that in half. I don't know how many journals are doing that, but I enjoy reviewing when it's a focused paper that actually comes to me that's appropriate for what my interest is. So I would say the more journals that could do that, I'd be willing to review more if I got that bonus. If you're paying me $50 an hour, I'm not doing it.
So we talked about ChatGPT created papers. How about ChatGPT created reviews? Is that something that all of you have, or any of you have come across, and how do we deal with that issue? I think currently ChatGPT would not probably do particularly good job, although it would probably do a better job than a lot of reviewers do, to be honest. But how do we allow that? How do we flag that? How do we watch for that? How do we respond to that? Any comments from the audience or the panel?
I think that there is like my personal opinion, a general philosophy which we should exercise when dealing with artificial intelligence tools. The decision should stay with humans. I can generate my report using ChatGPT, send it to you as an editor. It's your responsibility to read it. And if you find it reasonable, then it doesn't matter who wrote it. If you don't find it reasonable, it again doesn't matter who wrote it. If ChatGPT will fake, like really fake statements as it does all the time, right? And it passed by you once or twice, but then you flag me as a bad editor. But same thing can happen with me as human. I can write nonsense to you in my referee report.
If we need to review the reviews.
Yes, but that's a job of the editor. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that that's a very easy thing. I'm just saying that that's unfortunately the thing, right? And all of us who published knows that sometimes you are in conflict between several referee reports, and you talk to editor who is not necessarily expert, trying to explain why this makes or doesn't make sense. And ultimately, it's their decision. So I'm afraid we have to continue doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that very often the editor isn't really an expert on every paper that he or she edits. I would admit that personally, so I do have to rely, editors do have to rely on the expert opinions of the reviewers.
So as a person who's created an AI reviewer, and you guys have skirted around a lot of this issue, but there isn't a lot of strong feelings one way or the other, or at least that anybody's willing to say. I have had some of those on Twitter. They weren't always nice. Just want to let you know that. When we were doing the COVID preprint reviews, some people really took offense to, but it was a tiny fraction, but those are the ones you remember. It's the 10 or so interactions which just, the person just blows up and says, how dare you, stupid bot, look at my wonderful piece of work, right, and treat it so poorly. And that's true. That's going to be a problem. But one of the things that we've always, and one of the people actually that did this on Twitter to me was specifically arguing that, they shouldn't have to state which sex of the patients is actually being looked at. They were reanalyzing some data, and they looked at sex of, they didn't report on sex of patients. And I pretty much said, that's wrong, because here's a lovely study that says COVID has sex differences, and you're not reporting that. So, then that person just blocked me, and that was fine. But it's true. There are some things that I think, and I agree with the previous commenter, there are things that the robots can actually help us with. But there is never going to be, at least in the near future, a time when the decision should be made by a robot. I think that, when my robot does a bunch of stuff, they look up, catalog numbers for antibodies. Do you really want to do that by hand? It takes a long time, and it's painful. I mean, let the robots do the kind of mundane, stupid tasks that then editors and reviewers wouldn't have to do, but they can only go so far, because all of those systems will fail at some point, including ChatGPT, which does so spectacularly by always lying to me about which PubMed paper is actually the right citation. So we have 5 minutes left, but I really love it.
Scott Delman from the Association for Computing Machinery. I think there's a mechanical reason why you can't allow that as a publisher, which is if you're a peer reviewer and you take an oath to keep the submission anonymous, if there's single anonymous or double anonymous peer review, and then you upload that paper into ChatGPT, aren't you adding the paper to the corpus of information that ChatGPT is then using to generate responses to everyone else out there in the world? I mean, it seems somehow that that's going to violate the individual publisher's ethics and policies.
The bottom line is you don't know what's happening to that data. And we've started to be very explicit about this at the National Science Foundation when we're briefing our reviewers that you cannot, by law, disseminate these proposals. They're not public domain. You can't give them to your grad student, your postdoc, and you can't give them to ChatGPT. We just don't know what happens to it.
I'm not talking about just a list of the journals that you've reviewed for. I have to supply that to the head of my department every year. The head of the department spends a nanosecond looking at it and has no way of really confirming all of that. Some journals you can potentially look it up, but so it's useless. Peer reviews should be public. We should get rid of anonymous peer review. Peer reviews should be published with the articles in the online version, and that link should be included on your CV, because then people can actually evaluate the quality of your peer review. And that'll address to a certain extent the ChatGPT generated reviews, because there will be a permanent record of the review that you submitted, and even if we can't necessarily detect it today, we will be able to detect it tomorrow that this was generated by AI. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
I guess the one concern I have about non-anonymous peer review is that a lot of reviewers don't want their review to be known, or their identity to be known by the authors, or their review to be public, and they will then just simply say no when asked to review, and that makes a difficult problem even worse. But I certainly agree that there are aspects of open reviewing that are certainly very positive. Any other comments on that point? Are we out of time?
We all favor. Maybe I can give my 2 cents, and it's really 2 cents on the open review. I like the idea, and last time I did a review, I was offered the opportunity to have my review open, and I realized that I don't write the same thing if it's open or not. And it's not that one way of writing a review is necessarily better than the others. I would say similar things, but I would not say them the same way if it's for open publication or not. Just because you don't point typos in something that's going to be published for everybody to see. Nobody cares. You don't do the correction the same way. And so if I don't know in advance, it doesn't really make sense. And I think it might be less useful for the authors, the version I would write that would be published. It might be more, I would write to the audience that's going to read it rather than just for the author. So it's not exactly the same thing. On the other hand, I love PubPeer, and I would write on it occasionally, so under my own name. But for me, that's a different thing. Writing a published review for everybody, or writing to the authors, anonymously or not, it's very different task, I think.
I think we finished the session. It's sad for me to stop this session because it's been so interactive. I honestly, I'm so happy. I didn't expect that, but this is actually dialogue. And I'm sure there are so many ideas, at least I personally, unfortunately, I couldn't sit down and write, but I got some solutions to these problems. So thank you very much again. To all of you.